Well, for more analysis on hurricanes, I am now joined by Professor Bob Scholes from the University of Wits. We thank you very much for your time this evening, Professor. Essentially, we see that Hurricane Florence, as it has been termed, has been described as scale 3. What essentially is a scale 3 hurricane?
So the severity of a storm is related to the speed of the winds, because that's what causes most damage when you're on the coastline. And as the storm reaches the land, it typically slows down because it gets its energy from warm water in the ocean. And as it goes onto the land, you sort of knock the stuffing out of it. So the winds become much lower, which is why it was degraded. But that doesn't mean it's less dangerous, because when the storm gets stranded over the land, as Florence has become, and the typhoon Mangat as well, then all that water has nowhere to go, and basically it gets squeezed out like from a giant sponge. And certainly in the Carolinas, there are predictions that some places will get as much as a meter of rainfall in perhaps just 24 hours.
How essentially does a hurricane actually occur, and what sort of elements are conducive for a hurricane to thrive?
So just to clear up what many people find confusing, here in the Indian Ocean, we call exactly the same thing a cyclone.
Okay.
In the Atlantic, they call it a hurricane. And in the area of the South China Sea, they call the same phenomenon a typhoon. It's all the same thing.
Okay.
You get an area of low pressure, and the winds start to cycle, they start to spiral in towards it. And once it reaches a certain size, you would call that either a hurricane or a typhoon or a cyclone. It's a very large-scale phenomenon, often hundreds of kilometers apart, generally quite slow-moving. It gets nudged along by the jet stream or by the tropospheric winds, and it always sort of progresses westward, usually with a little bit of a hook towards the north in the northern hemisphere.
And in terms of the effect along the coastline and inland?
So the main effect on the coastline, apart from the very high winds, so if it was a Category 3 storm, which the typhoon was, and in fact the Hurricane Florence was a Category 4, even stronger than that, when it was out further over the ocean, and it lost some of that oomph as it came in closer to the land and got downgraded to a mere tropical storm. So the damage can be caused by the winds themselves, because they will blow trees right through your house.
Yeah.
But also what happens is the water in the ocean gets pushed ahead of the storm, and it creates something called storm surge. And if you're unlucky and that comes on top of a high tide, for instance, you can get a rise in the sea level by up to 6 meters. In Florence, it was only about 3 meters at the top of some of the bays, and there was a city there called New Bern in North Carolina, which saw a 3-meter rise in the sea level.
Yeah, well, you know, it's definitely not new to some areas along the coastline, specifically in areas like the United States and along the Philippines. In having a look at the disasters that have taken place over the years, have we seen better management by emergency and disaster services?
Oh, that's certainly true. We have really quite good forecasting because of the weather satellites which are up in space. We can see these things developing, and we can plot their track and work out, you know, exactly how fast they're moving, and then with the big computer models we can suggest where they will go really quite accurately. There are still some surprises in there. We don't get it all right because, for instance, this Hurricane Florence, you know, suddenly got very much stronger because it went over an area of warm water.
Okay.
And then it was sort of torn apart a little bit by crosswinds, and so it went down again and then went over the land.
You know, most of what we see sometimes in terms of disaster management and individuals preparing themselves are somewhat in the movies. How does one actually prepare themselves or manage a situation in disaster management?
So the first thing is to take it seriously, because if we see it in the movie, we say, oh, well, you know, that's not real life. If I would say, you know, if you get warning that there's a storm of this magnitude coming along, it's a very good idea to get out of its way and to move out of a high-risk area. Some people, you know, batten down the hatches and stay at home for various reasons. you are taking a big risk. And that applies not only to this kind of storm, but some of the other weather events that we see. Don't be a hero.
Is actually being underground a safe option?
Not for this kind of storm, because you know, the flooding is a big problem.
Yeah.
You don't want to be below ground. You know, in the United States of America and in the Philippines, houses are often built out of timber rather than brick that we're used to. And so you need to be in a safe part of the house that is not going to be penetrated by flying glass and bits of debris. So they do tell you to go to the core, usually under the staircase, around the staircase, because that is the safest place. And you certainly don't want to be out of doors, but you know, you mustn't be in a place that's going to get flooded.
Definitely. We thank you very much for your time this evening. That was Professor Bob Scholes from the Wits University, more about hurricanes, as well as its cause and effect.